So now the bill is even fucking further. I mean, the bill was already awful here. Let's look at Bernie Sanders live on the Senate floor ripping into it real quick.
Retrieve, review, and edit documents and send email to the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. The majority Republican managers of the bill, while seated or standing at the manager's desk, be permitted to deliver floor remarks, retrieve, review, and edit documents, and send email and other data communications from text displayed on wireless personal digital assistant devices and tablet devices. I further ask unanimous consent that the use of calculators be permitted on the floor during consideration of the bill. Further, that the staff be permitted to make technical at 16%, with 82% of. According to the most recent Gallup poll, the approval rate for Congress is at 16%, with 82% of the American people disapproving of the work we are doing here. 16 think we're doing a good job, 82% think not. Further, according to a recent University of Chicago poll, a strong majority of Americans, and this is extremely important, and I hope members of Congress hear this, a majority of Americans believe that the government is, quote, corrupt and rigged against me, end of quote. People believe the government is corrupt and rigged against them. Further,
remember, what do I always say? You can get 30% of Americans to agree on anything, except for whether or not Congress is doing a good job. How insane. This country has like a 48%, 48% of Americans polled believe that like fucking Jesus Christ is going to come back and that angels are real. Okay? You can get, like I've said, always, this is a HasanAbi fucking trope at this point. You can get at least 30% of Americans to agree to anything. Except for Congress doing a good job.
According to a USA Today poll that came out last week, a very strong majority no longer believe that the Democratic or Republican parties are responding to their needs.
I wonder why.
And we need to move to a multi-party system. And I think what is most frightening in terms of where the American people are politically today is that there is actually a growing number of Americans who believe that they may have to take up arms against their own government in order to accomplish what they think needs to be done. Madam President, all of this speaks to a very, very dangerous moment for American democracy, and in a number of ways it resembles the conditions that existed in Europe in the 1920s and early 1930s, which led to fascism and totalitarianism. In other words, at a time when so many of our people are hurting, many of them no longer believe that in our democratic system, government is capable of responding to their needs, and they are losing faith in our democracy. The people of this country believe, and in my view correctly, that we have a corrupt political system dominated by the wealthy and the powerful, and that we have a rigged economy in which large corporations are seeing huge profits, some cases heaviest profits ever, while the middle class and working families continue to see a decline in their standard of living. Let me just give you one small example of what is going on, and that is within the last few weeks, while Americans continue to pay outrageously high gas prices at the pump, prices are going down, but they're still a lot higher than they were a year ago, 2 years ago. And while people pay high prices, Exxon, Mobil, Shell, and BP reported a record-breaking $46 billion in profits during the second quarter. People pay more at the gas pump. The major oil companies are seeing huge profits. In terms of the extremely high price of prescription drugs, 3 large pharmaceutical companies, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, and AbbVie, increased their profits last year by 90% to $54 billion, a 90% increase in their profits, while so many of our people cannot afford the high cost of prescription drugs. Madam President, that is what a rigged economy is all about. Huge corporate profits, while working people cannot afford the basic necessities of life. Madam President, let us be clear about where we are as a nation, and that is the American people are tired of press releases, they're tired of 30-second ads, they're tired of speeches. They are hurting, and they are begging their elected officials to respond to their needs. And if you want to know why there is so much anger and so much frustration and so much disillusionment within our society today, it's important to understand that
Listen, the American people are tired of ads, which is why I always run top of the hour ad break, which I ran already, and urge you to avoid seeing those ads by subscribing.
Weekly wages for the average American worker are lower today than they were 49 years ago. And clearly, the inflation of today is pushing the average person even further behind. Not so many years ago, when I was a kid, it was possible for one worker in a family, like my father, never made much money, to earn enough money to take care of his kids and the family. Today, that is a rarity. Today, it is necessary in almost all cases for two workers in a family to have to go out to work. Today, Madam President, despite the huge increases in our economy, despite the tremendous explosion of technology, everything being equal, our younger generation will have a lower standard of living than their parents, have a harder time finding a home, having a harder time affording, being able to have a family. Imagine that, our younger generation having a lower standard of living than their parents. Madam President, half of our people today live paycheck to paycheck, and many millions are working for starvation wages, 9, 10, 11 bucks an hour. Further, many workers around the country who want to join a union and engage in collective bargaining at companies like Starbucks, Amazon, and other places are facing fierce and illegal anti-union resistance. And I have to say, Madam President, that this legislation does not address any of their needs. This legislation does not address the reality that we have more income and wealth inequality today than at any time in the last 100 years, where 3 people own more wealth than the bottom half of America. Doesn't address the fact that 95% of all new income is going to the top 1%. Doesn't address the reality that CEOs of major corporations are making 350 times what their workers are making. Madam President, I think everybody knows that we have a completely dysfunctional health care system. We now spend over $12,000 a year per person, more than double what other countries spend. Today, over 70 million Americans are uninsured or underinsured, and there are studies out there that say that some 60,000 people a year die because they're uninsured or underinsured and they don't get to a doctor on time. Meanwhile, every year, the insurance companies make tens of billions of dollars in profit. So we have a system in which the cost is outrageously high. People are dying because they don't get to a doctor on time. This bill does nothing to address the systemic dysfunctionality of the American healthcare system. Does nothing. Madam President, in terms of our kids, the future of our nation, shamefully, we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major nation on earth. This bill, as currently written, does nothing to address that. Madam President, our child care system is dysfunctional. If a working family is lucky enough to find a slot for their young one, on average, they will pay about $15,000 a year for child care, an impossibly high sum of money. Imagine that, $15,000 a year for child care if you're making 40 or 50,000 bucks. That is an absurd sum of money. Yet this bill turns its back on the working parents of this country and our children, does not begin to address the child care or pre-K crisis that we face. Madam President, a nation will be as great and competitive as its educational system is. And yet today, hundreds of thousands of bright...
No, when he says Madam President, he's misgendering Joe Brandon. Don't you know he's transphobic, Sweaty? It's not because Kamala is the president of the Senate as the vice president. He's misgendering Brandon. Talking directly to him and saying, Brandon, you're a woman. You're a broad. And the American people are tired of women. That's what he's saying.
Young kids all across this country are unable to afford a higher education. Imagine that. In the richest country in the history of the world, when we need the best educated workforce possible, got hundreds of thousands of young people.
Oh, this is prescient to us in chat. No one in Congress takes him seriously. They're all scoffing at him as he says this. He wouldn't be the only one vote otherwise. This is what makes us so angry. Yeah.
Cannot afford a higher education. And we have 45 million Americans who are struggling with student debt, sometimes outrageous levels of student debt. This bill, as currently written, does nothing to address it. Madam President, today, millions of elderly Americans and half of our senior citizens are trying to survive on $25,000 a year or less. Millions of senior citizens are unable to afford to go to a dentist. Imagine that. In the richest country on earth, elderly people can't afford to go to a dentist. Their teeth are rotting in their mouths. They can't afford hearing aids in order to hear what their kids, grandchildren have to say. They can't afford eyeglasses. This bill ignores that issue, does nothing to expand Medicare to cover those very basic health care needs. The result, millions of seniors will continue to have rotten teeth and lack the dentures, hearing aids, or eyeglasses they deserve. Madam President, and I hear this all of the time in Vermont, and I expect my colleagues hear it as well, so many of our elderly and disabled people would much prefer to stay in their homes rather than be forced into nursing homes. They need someone to come to.
Archie21, love Bernie, but why is he so cozy with Brandon, his good friend, and all the worst ghouls in DNC? Who cares? Like, who cares? He rips him, he shreds him regularly where it fucking matters. And he does politics to be like, oh, they're my good friends. These are my coworkers. You know what I mean? Some of you act like you've never fucking worked a day in your lives where you have to, just say like, oh yeah, these guys are my friends. I like them. And even if he's actually fucking friends with them, I don't care. I just don't care. I literally do not care. I'm not deriving like additional I don't know, like an additional ounce of scrutiny out of like whether Bernie Sanders like doesn't fucking spit in Joe Biden's face or not, okay? You also have to recognize that like there's a reason why there's so much resentment towards Bernie Sanders within the Democratic Party. That is not because he doesn't adequately mention how friendly he is with Joe Brandon. That is because he regularly fucking makes them look bad. Okay? How does he make him look bad? By adding provisions like expanding the child tax credit. Provisions that make him profoundly popular, by the way. When you put that in there, in the voterama, all of a sudden you have, 50 Democrats or 49 Democrats that vote no on it, making them look fucking horrible.
Their home to help them with their basic needs. I don't think anyone denies that we have a major crisis in home health care. And the people who are doing home health care now, and God bless them all, are usually overworked and underpaid. This bill, as currently written, does nothing to address that crisis. Madam President, again, no debate. Everybody agrees that we have a major housing crisis in America. Some 600,000 people are homeless, sleeping out on the streets in every state in this country. In addition to the homeless issue, nearly 18 million households are paying 50% or more of their limited incomes for housing. Imagine that. Imagine that, what it means. How do you have any money to do anything else when you're paying 50% of your limited income for housing. Yet this bill does nothing to address the major housing crisis that we face or build one unit of safe and affordable housing. Just another issue that we push aside. And I would say, Madam President, and every working person understands this, that while ordinary people are struggling with childcare, with health care, with housing, with the basic necessities of life, the people on top today are doing phenomenally well. During the pandemic alone, the billionaire class saw an almost $2 trillion increase in their wealth. So that, in a snapshot, is where we are as a nation today. Working people are hurting. In many ways, their standard of living is in decline. People on top are doing phenomenally well. And that takes us to where we are this evening. The importance of the bill that we are considering this evening is that it...
This is why people are acting out about Bernie. Yeah, dude, I know. He like both sides Israel, okay? I know. 900 years old. He should be allowed to have fucking bad takes. I'm sorry. And I say this as someone who daggers the Israeli occupying force regularly, okay? Sure, you're not going to agree with 100% of his fucking opinions. I don't know what you want. Like, ultimately, guess what? He's also not fucking living in the woods and training revolutionary Marxists to, like, overtake military bases, okay? So there's always going to be some shit that he's doing that's not enough.
It is not a normal, not a regular piece of legislation. It is a reconciliation bill. And I know that to anybody outside of the Beltway, that doesn't mean much. But what it does mean is that unlike regular legislation here in the Senate, this bill does not require 60 votes.
Want to go over your YouTube later, King? Yes, Lud. We'll do it later.
To get passed. All we need to get this bill passed are 50 votes plus the vice president, if it is a tie. Now, I say this in all honesty, that it is extremely sad to me, and I think the American people, that up to this point, we have not had one Republican come forward and say, you know what, I want to work on the housing crisis, on the health care crisis, on the education crisis, on the home health care crisis. Sadly, we have not had one Republican come forward who is prepared to stand up for working families, for the children, for the elderly, or for the environment. That is a sad state of affairs. But here is the truth. If all 50 members of the Democratic caucus were to stand together today, we could pass some enormously important amendments which would have a profound impact on improving the lives of working people in our country, and maybe, just maybe, could begin the process of restoring faith in our democracy. Poll after poll makes it clear. Not only are the American people hurting, they want Congress to take bold action to improve their lives. And under the budget reconciliation process, we have the opportunity to do that. And if we don't do it now, when all we need are 50 votes, it is quite questionable as to when, in fact, we will ever do that. In other words, what I am asking today is for all 50 members of the Democratic caucus to come together and begin the process of addressing some, not all, some of the major crises facing working families. It is absolutely imperative that we show the American people that we are capable of representing the needs of ordinary people, not just billionaire campaign contributors, not just lobbyists, but ordinary people who are hurting today. And if we cannot do that,
can't do that.
Not only will people continue to hurt and suffer, but to my mind, it is questionable for how long we remain a democracy.
I mean, we're not.
Madam President, let me say a few words about what is in this legislation. A bill which has some good features, but also, in my view, has some very bad features. This bill deals with three major areas: prescription drugs, climate, and taxation. Let me deal with at least two of them. Prescription drugs. Now, I know that in Vermont, and I suspect in Wisconsin and all over this country, people are outraged. at the fact that they are paying so much for prescription drugs. They are outraged that in some cases we pay 10 times more than Canada and other countries for the same exact product. Now, the good news is, Madam President, that this bill, this reconciliation bill, will do what should have been done many years ago, something that many of us called for many years ago, and that it will allow Medicare to begin negotiating prescription drug prices with the pharmaceutical industry. Now, that is not a radical idea. That is an idea that exists in probably every other major country on earth. And that is why their prices are so much lower. They don't let the drug companies charge any price that they want. So that's the good news.
I've said time and time again, which of course, bargaining of that sort should be covered under, a capitalist free market. When you go to like a Costco or you go to a Sam's Club, wherever the fuck, you're getting wholesale prices. Why? Because you're getting wholesale, you're purchasing wholesale. The price point is lower. America's the only fucking OECD nation where the government buys a boatload of fucking wholesale drugs and can't actually negotiate because it is banned. That's the reason why other countries are able to pay a tenth of the prices for the same pharmaceuticals that you get.
News. But here, Madam President, is the bad news, and we must be honest about it. At a time when so many of our people cannot afford the prescription drugs they need, and 1 out of 4 Americans can't even fill the prescription their doctor's write, this Medicare negotiating provision will not go into effect for 4 years, at which time only 10 drugs will be negotiated, with more to come in later years. So, if anybody thinks that as a result of this bill we're suddenly going to see lower prices for Medicare, you are mistaken. Ain't going to happen next year, the year after, the year after, the year after. And by the way, given the incredible power of the pharmaceutical industry, I would suspect even money that they will figure out a way to get around this provision if it takes 4 years to implement.
Oh, yeah.
So, this provision will have no impact on the prices for those.
Damn! Look at that. Yo! Look at how quickly he pulled it out and swapped it. Make this man the president. I don't give a fuck. He's 900 years old. I'm going against everything I said earlier about like how old people, I'm ageist, I'm ableist, whatever. This man is able, okay? This man is able-bodied. He's able and he's capable. Look how fast he pulled his phone out and fucking he slid behind his back, dude. Look at that. Look.
This provision will have no impact.
Boom! Passed! That's crazy. That's crazy. Some of you are like 17 and you can't do that, okay? Woo! God damn, dude. This man deserves it. This man deserves the presidency.
On the prices for those Americans. Furthermore, this provision will have no impact on the prices for those Americans who are not on Medicare. So if you're under 65, this bill will not impact you at all, and the drug companies will be able to continue to go.
That's one of the worst aspects of it that they totally fucking destroyed.
On their merry way and raise prices to any level that they want. Madam President, under this bill, at a time when the drug companies are enjoying huge profits, the pharmaceutical industry will still be allowed to charge the American people by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. So that is the reality of this bill. What do we do? Well, if we are serious about responding to what the American people want in the polling that I have seen, it's like 70 or 80% of the people understand that prescription drugs are much too high. They want us to act. This bill, unfortunately, does not do that. If we are serious about reducing the price of prescription drugs, we know exactly how we can do it. For over 30 years, the Veterans Administration has been negotiating with the pharmaceutical industry to lower the cost of prescription drugs. Moreover, for decades, virtually every other country on earth has been doing the same thing. The result of where we are today is that Medicare pays twice as much for the exact same prescription drugs as the VA and people all over this country. In some cases, as I mentioned earlier, we may pay up to 10 times as much for a particular drug. In other words, when it comes to reducing the price of prescription drugs under Medicare, we do not have to reinvent the wheel. We could simply require Medicare to pay no more for prescription drugs than the VA. That is not a radical idea.
Bro, this, like, if there was even like talk of this happening, they would assassinate him. I swear to God, the pharma lobby would be like, all right, you're dead. They would drone strike his fucking house, dude. The profit margins are at stake here. You know what I mean? There's no shot. It's wild that, like, this is the most tepid thing he could advocate for, by the way. I want you to understand, what he is currently talking about is simply making sure that large purchases of pharmaceuticals that are being conducted by the government be price locked so that the VA and Medicare have the same, or the Medicaid has the same fucking price point. It's just, it's out of the question. Like, this is not Medicare for all, not anything. It just straight up reduces the cost of the pharmaceuticals that the government buys and reduces the cost of the pharmaceuticals that end up in your hands as well. The only negative consequence of this is that big pharma profits will go down. And it's not even a question in the Senate. This is not even being considered.
That is a simple idea. You got one government agency doing what they're doing for 30 years. All we have to do is have Medicare do the same. And if we did that, we could literally cut the price of prescription drugs on the Medicare in half.
Yeah, but what about the shareholders? They could suck me from the back too. Straight up. This entire system is fucking broken, dude. The notion that, like, we're talking about the shareholders in that circumstance, when like 90% of the shareholders are also suffering as a consequence of said drug prices being so high. You get it, right? Because, like, the way the stock market works is that the top 10% of wealth own 90% of the market, okay? So sure, like, technically everyone has a stake in the stock market. Everyone is in some way, shape, or form, if they've bought into, like, the pharmaceutical industry in the stock market, their 401ks might take a hit, like a minor hit, but they're taking a fucking hit at the bank in their wallet every goddamn day. Every single one of your parents and yourselves are already personally taking a hit. You might be marginally better off. Your investments might be marginally better off, but that's negligible, okay, in comparison to your fucking wallet taking a gigantic hit when you pay 10 times the prices for the drugs that every other country is paying less for. Same drugs. And this is the wild part about it that Americans cannot comprehend. This is an intentional aspect of the privatization of social safety nets, such as Social Security in the form of 401ks. This is what happens when you don't have pensions, and pension plans are already, complicated and have a litany of issues as well. But this is what happens when you privatize an aspect of the government that's supposed to be publicly handled and adequate. Motherfucker says you. Bad take. Why would you want to lose money? No, I'm saying you would make more money in the long run. In the form of incredible amounts of savings. Okay?
Half in a matter of months, not years. And that is why I am introducing.
Americans fund a lot of the research and development as well, then they can't afford to buy the drugs that they help create. Yeah. R&D's coming out of your pockets too in the form of taxes, which is good. It's a good place that the taxes go to. You're funding these colleges that also then end up going back into the R&D by paying insanely high prices for colleges. And when you look at the per capita argument for research and development, for what you put in, our research and development, like our new novel chemical compound development per capita, is still significantly lower than countries like Switzerland, which also have a relatively capitalist healthcare system, but certainly not even in the fucking top 5. And that's before you attribute cost to it. How much we pay for all these things, how much we pay for R&D versus how much new chemical compounds, novel chemical compounds we find in the United States of America. Of course, if you look at the totality of it, America is gigantic. So yes, we are inventing more here than other countries that are much, much smaller. But you have to look at the efficiency. If you want to look at it from a capitalist point of view, you could do that as well. From an efficiency perspective, if you were to look at new chemical compounds being found, $1 goes a much longer way in every social democratic country where there are more novel chemical compounds being found per capita than the United States of America.
An amendment today to do just that. Under this amendment, we could save Medicare $900 billion over the next decade. This is 9 times more savings than the rather weak negotiation provisions currently in the bill. We could save $900 billion by negotiating rather than $100 billion. The reason that we pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs is not hard to understand. During the past 20 years, the pharmaceutical industry has spent over $5 billion on lobbying and over $500 million in campaign contributions. Further, the pharmaceutical industry has, over the years...
That's called kickbacks, baby. You got to give the people that are allowing you to rake in record high profits a crumb back in return. That's what it is. Instead of paying the federal government, right, in the form of taxes, instead of lowering your pharmaceutical cost by allowing the government to negotiate, pay a couple $1 billion to the Senate so they just make sure that those key provisions that would hurt your bottom line never get passed.
Mounted an unprecedented lobbying effort in Washington and in states all across this country. Now, what is unbelievable, if you want to know what a corrupt political system is about, if you want to know what money in politics is about, if you want to know what corporate greed is about, if you want to know why we pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs, please understand that right now, at this moment, the pharmaceutical industry has more than 1,700 well-paid lobbyists on Capitol Hill to protect their interests, including former congressional leaders of both major political parties. They buy Democratic leaders, they buy Republican leaders, they buy former members of Congress. 1,700 well-paid lobbyists to make sure they continue to rip off the American people and charge us.
In every other country, we call this bribery and corruption, by the way. One of the most significant problems with even countries like Sri Lanka or any other country that's developing is corruption, right? Turkey, Erdogan, he's so corrupt. He's getting kickbacks from the same industry leaders that are giving him the money rather than funding the fucking federal government, funding the government, right? That's corruption when it happens in Turkey. That's corruption when it happens in any other country. But here in America, it's called corporate lobbying and it's totally legal. In the West, you call it lobbying because we have codified corruption. We have made it legal. We've legalized corruption, so it's somehow more appropriate. This used to be better in Europe. It's changing over the course of the past 2 decades. Europe has also changed with respect to how much lobbying works, but there's still public funding laws and rules and regulations in place as to how much money politicians can get. But of course, if you look at places like the UK, for example, there's still methods of sidestepping that by getting your friends into positions of power. You know what I mean? Which also happens in America on top of the lobbying. Hey, I mean, if it's above board, you can regulate it. No, you can't. If it could be regulated, it would be regulated. It is a overwhelmingly popular thing to destroy the nefarious an outsized, gross amount of influence that lobbyists have over Congress. It is the reason why America is an oligarchy rather than a true democratic country. And yet you talk about regulation as though it's something that you can regulate, when capital power is so incredibly, overwhelmingly powerful that there's no regulation in place.
The highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. That is over 3 lobbyists for every 1 member of Congress. 535 members of Congress, 1,700.
Motherfucker said corruption, when it's legalized, can be regulated. Meanwhile, Bernie Sanders talking about how there's 3 lobbyists for every member of Congress. How do you regulate that? Well, I have an idea on how you can regulate it, for the record. But, I won't say it out loud.
Lobbyist. Mr. President, just yesterday, and this is really interesting, and I think it brings it all out, the CEO of Pharma, his name is Steve Ubel, I think, basically said, and I appreciate his honesty and straightforward, he said, anybody who votes even for this incredibly tepid bill.
People will turn around and be like, lol, cops policing themselves? That's funny. Obviously, that's not going to fucking work. But then when it comes to Congress policing itself, you're like, no, it'll happen. It'll happen. Why? Because, I believe in the theory of democracy. Yeah, totally, bro. It'll definitely happen. I'm sure Congress will regulate itself to ensure that they get less money as a consequence of sitting in this fucking throne of power. That'll certainly happen eventually,
He said, we are going to go after you. He stated, and I love this, the kind of modesty, he said, quote, few associations have all the tools of modern political advocacy at their disposal in the way that Pharma does, end of quote. In other words, if you dare to vote in any way to lower the cost of prescription drugs, we're going to spend all of the money we have, and we have endless, unlimited amounts of money against you. That is what a corrupt political system is about. That's what corporate greed is about. Basically, the CEO of Pharma saying, you vote for this bill, you can expect millions and millions of dollars of 30-second ads against you. That's where we are in the state of our democracy today. Madam President, Mr. President, prescription drugs is a huge issue, but it's not the only issue that is dealt with inadequately in this legislation. It is my view, I think it is the view of the majority of American people, it is certainly the view of the scientific community, that climate change is an existential threat to that planet. Now, that sounds like a big word, existential. But what it means, if we don't get our act together, there may not be a planet that is healthy and habitable for our children and grandchildren. It is very fundamental. Do we protect future generations?
The only problem with Bernie Sanders is that he says fundamental like he's British. That's the only issue I have with him. That's it.
Mr. President, this legislation provides $370 billion over the next decade to combat climate change and to invest in so-called energy security programs. Now, the good news, and it is good news, is that this legislation, as currently written, would provide more funding for energy efficiency and sustainable energy than has ever been invested before. That is the good news. But, Mr. President, the bad news is that this bill, as currently written, includes a huge giveaway to the fossil fuel industry, both in the reconciliation bill that we are considering and in a side deal that was just made public a few days ago. Mr. President, under this legislation, the fossil fuel industry will receive billions of dollars in new tax breaks and subsidies over the next 10 years, on top of the $15 billion in tax breaks and corporate welfare that they already receive every year. And interestingly enough, Mr. President, that may well be the reason why BP, one of the largest oil companies in the world, supports this bill. It may be the reason why Shell, another huge oil company, supports this bill. And it is the reason, I suspect, why the CEO of ExxonMobil is pleased by many of the provisions included in this bill. So we've got to think a little bit about what it means when major oil companies who are in the process of destroying the planet support this legislation. Under this bill, up to 60 million acres of public waters must be offered up for sale each and every year to the oil and gas industry before the federal government could approve any new offshore wind development. To put that in perspective, 60 million acres is the size of the state of Michigan. Further, under this bill, up to 2 million acres of public lands must be offered up for sale each and every year to the oil and gas industry before leases can move forward for any renewable energy development on public lands. In total, this bill will offer the fossil fuel industry up to 700 million acres of public lands and waters to oil and gas drilling.
Wait, what do you mean, what the fuck? Are you guys unfamiliar with this? I literally have been covering this for the past week. Hello? Why do you think Joe Manchin is on board with this? It's because the only way to get Joe Manchin on board with it, remember, no conflict of interest for Joe, to be sitting on the fucking energy committee despite having his family quite literally own a coal mine and represent the oil and gas industry's interests at every step. The reason how you got, Big Coal Joe on board was because they're opening up acres. Like, they're tying green energy, renewable energy initiatives, which, by the way, are not like regulatory mechanisms, which are absolutely a necessity at this point, but instead they are basically incentives. And even to give those incentives to corporations to invest into renewable energies in the form of subsidies and tax breaks, you had to open up acres of land every year for the oil and gas industry to drill on, if they wish to do so.
Over the next decade, far more than the oil and gas industry could possibly use. And Mr. President, that is not all. The fossil fuel industry will not just benefit from the provisions in the reconciliation bill as currently written. A deal has also been reached to make it easier for the fossil fuel industry to receive permits
only in America,
for their oil
boys.
and gas projects. This deal would approve the $6.6 billion Mountain Valley Pipeline, a fracked gas pipeline that would span over 300 miles from West Virginia to Virginia and potentially on to North Carolina. This is a pipeline that would generate emissions equivalent to that released by 37 coal plants or by over 27 million cars each and every year. Mr. President, let me quote from a July 29th letter from over 350 environmental organizations, including Friends of the Earth, Food and Water Watch, and the Climate Justice Alliance, expressing concerns about this bill. And I quote, "Any approval of new fossil fuel projects or fast-tracking of fossil fuel permitting is incompatible with climate leadership. Oil, gas, and coal production are the core drivers of the climate and extinction crises. There can be no new fossil fuel leases, exports, or infrastructure if we have any hope of preventing ever-worsening climate crises, catastrophic floods, deadly wildfires, and more, all of which are ripping across the country as we speak. We are out of time. Therefore, we, these 350 organizations, are calling on you, as the President, leadership of Congress, to fulfill your promise to lead on Congress, starting with denying approvals for the Mountain Valley Pipeline, rejecting all new federal fossil fuel leases onshore in the Gulf of Mexico and Alaska and everywhere else, and preventing any fast-track permits for fossil fuel projects. Mr. President, I would ask unanimous consent to insert the full letter into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. And here is what the Center for Biological Diversity had to say on this bill. Quote, "This is a climate suicide pact. It is self-defeating to handcuff renewable energy development to massive new oil and gas extraction. The new leasing required in this bill will fan the flames of the climate disasters torching our country, and it's a slap in the face to the communities fighting to protect themselves from filthy fossil fuels." End quote. Now, Mr. President, in my view, we have got to do everything we can to take on the greed, the irresponsibility, the destructiveness of the fossil fuel industry, not give billions of dollars in corporate welfare to an industry that has been destroying our planet. And that is why I will be introducing an amendment today to strike all of the benefits to the fossil fuel industry that are in this bill, and I will be asking for a roll call vote on it. And, Mr. President, let me say a word about some of the other amendments that I'll be introducing. I will be introducing an amendment that is widely popular. The concept is widely popular, and that is to expand Medicare to provide dental, vision, and hearing benefits. This amendment is fully paid for by demanding that the wealthiest people start paying their fair share of taxes. Further, I will be introducing an amendment to provide $30 billion to establish the Civilian Conservation Corps, which would create 400,000 jobs for young people to combat climate change. The entire younger generation wants to roll up their sleeves and get involved in the effort to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel. And this amendment and the establishment of a civilian conservation corps would allow them to do that. And further,
I got to pee.
Mr.
I'll be
President,
back.
I'll be introducing an amendment to expand the $300 a month child tax credit for the next 5 years by restoring the top corporate tax rate from 21 to 28%. As you know, we made significant progress in lowering childhood poverty in America. We reduced it by 40% with the establishment of a child tax credit. But unfortunately, that was not continued in this year, and I think it needs to do so. So, bottom line, this is where we are at. The American people are hurting. Tens of millions of workers are falling further and further behind. The elderly are hurting. The kids are hurting. And people are looking to their elected representatives in Washington to finally address the crises that they are facing. And in a reconciliation bill, where we only need 50 votes and the vice president, we have the capability, if we pass these amendments, of taking a giant step forward, not only in addressing the needs of our kids, our elderly and working families, but it may be, just maybe, beginning to restore the confidence of the American people in their democracy, in believing that their elected officials are listening to them and not just lobbyists and wealthy campaign contributors. So I would look forward to offering these amendments and getting them.
And I look forward to you not voting for them and telling the American people that there is no shot in hell that Congress represents their best interests. Okay? Will you please knock on the point that this is against the free market that conservatives and capitalists preach about? What do you mean? There's no such thing as a fucking free market, okay? There is no such thing as the free market. Not real. It's a unicorn. Made up.
Passed, and I thank the president very much and yield the floor.
How can you say there's a free market when you look at Congress and the way that they operate? How can you say there's a free market when you look at the multiple billion-dollar industry in the form of ads and propaganda and PR? There is no such thing. Okay? It does not exist, folks. It does not exist. Not real. Top of the hour ad break, on the other hand, is real. Okay? Because at the top of the hour, there's a 60-second ad break. That's not propaganda. That's real life. And you see those ads as long as you don't subscribe. Now, of course, you can subscribe for $5 or for free. Or what the fuck? Las Canarias with a 50 gifted sub. Jesus Christ. As long as you're one of the lucky 50 that just got gifted by Las Canarias, then you're fine. But if you weren't lucky enough to receive one of those, then, you know, if you weren't a part of the 50 bomb, then you're going to have to subscribe on your own for $5 or for free with a Twitch Prime by connecting your Amazon Prime account to your Twitch account, where you get one free Prime subscription a month. Hopefully you use it on your favorite streamer, me, even though I don't run as much ads as your other top content creators on this platform. Psychonaut Andy, thank you for the 5 get the subs. Here's the 1 minute ad break now. And Cock Eed Fartin, thank you for the 5 get the subs as well. I mean, let's look at this, by the way. Speaking of free market, Republicans block cap on insulin. The 5G vaccine for QAnon teens. Thank you for the 5 get the subs. Republicans block cap on insulin costs for many Americans from the Democratic deal. Republicans stripped out a provision to cap insulin costs at $35 for private insurers, but the Inflation Reduction Act still includes an insulin price cap for seniors on Medicare. Democrats had tried to preserve the provision to cap insulin costs at $35 for private insurance, but that vote failed 57 to 43, with 7 Republicans voting with them to keep insulin cost cap in the bill. 3 short of what was needed. We needed 3 fucking votes. 3 fucking votes, and blammo, all of a sudden, that's legislation. Okay? 3. Think about that. 3. Wild to consider. Here are some of the other parts that was lost in the sauce here. Here are the casualties of the big Build Back Better agenda, some of which was supposed to be in here, but were not. But ultimately, universal pre-K, gone. Child care dollars, gone. Elder care dollars, gone. Child tax credit, gone. No extension for that. Housing dollars, gone. Community college, gone. EITC expansion, closing the Medicaid gap. Immigration, tax rate hikes, gone. Millionaire surtax, gone. Ending carried interest, also gone. These items were excluded from the new bill. Now, let me tell you something. People are celebrating this, okay? I want to talk about the person responsible for, at the very least, eliminating a carried interest loophole, ending the carried interest loophole. Wonderful the bisexual icon that goes by the name of Kirsten Sinema. Before we talk about the bill with respect to climate change, I want to just give a quick shout out to this lovely lady here. Kirsten Sinema used to be a dumpster diving, Green Party voting, America KKK type anarchist. Back in the day, you know. Here's Dan Amira, who says, if you ever doubt that you can change your path in life, just remember that this person went on to become the Senate's top defender of hedge funders and private equity. Okay? Just remember. And the worst part about it is that her fucking bunk ass, dumbass fucking style never changed. Like, if anything, you could have worn fucking pantsuits and you would look better than this shit. Okay? That's the worst part. Kirsten Sinema always had horrendous drip, including rocking a fucking tutu when she was well into her goddamn 30s. And she still dresses like she survived a car crash, like a really, really horrible car crash. But Kirsten Sinema has a lot of allies for this. Finance bros are literally getting bottle service dedicated to Kirsten Sinema. Just wild that she cares more about her helping millionaire bankers pay less taxes than helping everyday Arizonans. Look at that. At Nightingale, Kirsten is bae, carried interest. She dresses like a kid whose parents let them wear Halloween costumes year round. Oh my Lord. You know she's shopping. You know she's shopping at Ross Dress for Less. Bringing it back to my original point, which is no one should shop at Ross Dress for Less, except Kirsten Sinema shops there all the fucking time. Okay? Oh my God, that is a TJ Maxx fix. Stop it. That is not true and you know it. So, toxic chat proving they hate powerful women. Oh, 100%. Lots of things about the Manchin climate bill are true all at once. It's far and away the country's most significant piece of climate policy ever and is nowhere near the level of action scientists say is necessary to avoid the worst impacts of the climate crisis. What Chase Woodruff is saying. Talking about, beware of anyone telling you that the modest or incremental progress doesn't matter because we only have a narrow window to act, despite what is forgivably implied by some rhetoric. The climate crisis is not a ticking time bomb. Every ton of greenhouse gases emitted into the atmosphere, whether tomorrow or in 2050, will make things worse. And every ton we stop from being emitted, whether tomorrow or in 2050, will help. Until we stop releasing significant amounts of carbon into the atmosphere, the world will get warmer and the impacts, deadly and destabilizing heat, drought, extreme weather, sea level rise, cascading economic and political crises will get worse. He's right. So the wonderful impact of this bill in particular that we have shown is that it encourages more drilling. So there's that element. We already have hit about 1.2 centigrade of warming over pre-industrial temperatures, and things are bad. They will be worse at 1.5 centigrade, even worse at 2, worse at 2.5, and so on. Every incremental of further warming will mean a greater degree of human death and suffering. Okay, that means crop being wiped out, areas becoming desolate and impossible to do any sort of agricultural production in. That means mass migration of climate change refugees. That means war as a consequence of not having agricultural production happen in places where it used to be able to. Okay? Syrian civil war. The Syrian war in general is just a perfect representation of this. Climate change had significant impacts there. To grossly oversimplify the Manchin bill, though both direct emissions impacts and knock-on economics and geopolitical effects will probably help move the world from a path towards slightly more than 2.5 centigrade of a warming path towards slightly less than 2.5 centigrade. Together with actions over the last several years by other countries along with states and the private sector, the world has continued to make progress bending the emissions curve, and truly catastrophic warming levels of plus 3 centigrade or more now seem unlikely. This, by the way, is still devastating. Remember, we're talking about like once every 1,000-year extreme weather conditions happening year-round. Okay? Year-round. Why? Because 1.5 degrees increase. 2.5 means like humans are dying. I mean, humans are dying already, but like not indirectly from, I don't know, natural disasters or whatnot, but like human beings are dying because like there's no food and now they're fighting. There's war. There's no food. There's no agricultural production and development. And there's also massively chaotic and debilitating, destructive natural disasters. So then you have to move. Okay? You have to literally move somewhere else. And then when you try to move somewhere else, then those countries are going to put up their borders and kill you. But again, all of this taken together is still a far cry from the emissions pathway that scientists say would do the most limit to catastrophic impacts while still remaining technologically and economically feasible. A 1.5 centigrade consistent target. When scientists released an exhaustive report on the 1.5 target in 2018, they warned that achieving it would require rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society. This is the RDC World meme, literally, that happened in real life. Though it's been clear for a while now, the Manchin bill is a final confirmation that the world hasn't chosen that path. Without drastic transformative action by the world's largest economy, the 1.5 target is now almost certainly out of reach. So that's where we are. Pending further action, which is unlikely at the federal level for the foreseeable future, we've prevented the vast amounts of harm that would result in 3 centigrade plus warming, while choosing to accept the still vast amounts of harm that will result at 2 to 2.5. Like Mad Max future shit. Now, if you're living in the imperial core, it's not going to be as impactful for you. I mean, it still will be obviously devastating, but it's not going to be as impactful for you if you were living in like fucking Guatemala, okay? If you're living in an area that is underdeveloped and all of a sudden you can't even fucking grow crops anymore, you can't grow food anymore, you're fucked. Then you move somewhere where you move somewhere for survival, and then that place is fucked because you're now moving in droves. Not in like the natural, healthy amount of people that are trying to come into the United States of America, a country with enough wealth to be able to take care of all these people, but like you're moving to another third world country. You're now, if you're lucky, that is, of course, if you haven't died because of civil war or some shit, now you're moving to another third world country that's also not able to take care of you, okay? And then that country is also destabilized, trying to, in droves, in the millions, like multiple fucking millions, I'm talking like hundreds of millions, trying to rush the fucking border of a country that will actually be habitable for you.